Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being covered in the current edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined today by Thad Greenson, news editor, and Jennifer Fumiko-Cahill, arts and features editor at the North Coast Journal. Welcome, guys.
How you doing, Dave?
Hi, Dave.
Pretty good. Sunshine, blue sky, heat wave. That's always a good thing to have. I'm loving the weather here. I'm loving getting out, hiking and stuff. So hopefully you guys got out this weekend, got to enjoy a little bit of it.
Went for a nice bike ride and tweaked my neck. So.
Oh no! It's like the skiing incident. You're just like, you thought it was going to be cool, but then it just lingered. So I feel bad. Oh well. Didn't mean to bring that up, Thad.
No, it might be age related. It might have nothing to do with the weather or the bike ride, but
yeah, to be determined, right? Why don't we just dive right in, Thad? And why don't you tell us what is on the cover of this week's edition of the North Coast Journal?
Yeah, this week we have a cover story from freelancer Sarah Reith, who is a freelancer actually based in Mendocino County, but covers a lot of kind of regional natural resource issues. And so she did a timely follow-up for us on the Potter Valley project and kind of uncertainty surrounding that, which folks might recall we had reported on, I think, late last year. And the last that we'd reported on was that PG&E was basically moving to decommission the project, which is a hydroelectric project, but is kind of so out of date it doesn't produce much electricity and is mostly important regionally because it is the mechanism that diverts water from the Eel River to Russian River interests in Mendocino County. And it looked like that PG&E was kind of throwing up its hands and just going to move forward with taking the dams down and letting the other parties interested, both nonprofits along the Eel River looking to restore its fish populations, and then all of those water interests in the Russian River Valley, let them kind of sort out what to do next. And that's kind of the assumption that everybody was going on until last week when PG&E reversed course and said that it was going to continue operating the project with annual licenses, and which kind of leaves the future a little bit uncertain.
Did they give a reason why this is the direction that they chose?
Not a really compelling one. I mean, just that they felt like it was in the best interest of the ratepayers, but they had been saying for a long time that it was not in the best interest of the ratepayers to keep doing it because it, like I said, it generated so little power, and with their previous license having expired, they would have had to do a fair amount of environmental upgrades, which they're still now looking at.
So not to get super deep into this because there's lots of great information in the article, but there's a group of stakeholders that thought they were going to be able to transition into ownership management for purposes of wildlife restoration and water diversion to Russian River communities. What's the future look like for that group of people that are, maybe right now don't know what's next?
Yeah, so that group remains very much engaged. The idea, basically, it's been dubbed the two Basin Solution, but is that the parties can work together to kind of reach their mutual goals, which, for the Russian River interests is really water rights and securing steady water supplies. And for the down Eel River interests is really, restoring those fish habitats, which is predicated on dam removal and getting the Scott Dam, especially upriver out, which would open up lots and lots of spawning habitat for salmon. And so basically those parties are going to continue working to that end while some of the regulatory interests and while pressuring some of the regulatory interests to, really hold PG&E's feet to the fire, so to speak, to make the needed improvements as far as fish passages and stuff, with the hope that that's just going to become cost prohibitive for PG&E. And they will then move forward with decommissioning. And then really what would be left is finding a mechanism, whether it's a parcel tax or something like that, to get those Russian River interests, water users to pay for that water, which they to date have not been doing. But they certainly have a vested interest in keeping those water supplies going, which then, currently that apparatus is kind of funded by PG&E and its hydroelectric dam, but when that goes away, then they'll have to figure out another mechanism for pumping that water out and pay for the upkeep of that facility and stuff.
Well, thank you for sharing Sarah's update on the status there. I'm sure there's lots more that we're going to follow as the various entities, agencies, stakeholders kind of sort out what's next.
Yeah, it'll definitely be a developing story, and PG&E seems to have a knack for throwing wild cards into the mix. So,
speaking of wild cards in the mix, I think that's a great segue for another topic that you're covering this week, which is Measure S. Can you tell us a little bit about the most recent developments earlier this week?
Yeah, so I talked to you a couple weeks ago about the push among cannabis farmers locally to have Measure S, the cannabis cultivation tax, locally repealed. And in a couple marathon sessions, the Board of Supervisors has considered this idea. And then just on Tuesday, I'm sorry, at a special meeting on Monday before the regular meeting on Tuesday, voted 3-1 to move forward with providing cannabis cultivators with some tax relief. And so basically what they've decided to do is to shelve or to suspend late payment fees for this year's tax payments that are due, or the payments that are due this year. It's kind of weird because the tax bills actually trail a year behind cultivation. So the bills coming due this year are for last year's cultivation. So they basically agreed to suspend late payment fees and those kinds of things for those bills currently due, and then to reduce next year's tax bills by 85%. So a very significant decrease.
So there's all kinds of technical details. I had the good fortune or misfortune, depending on how you look at it, of learning a lot about this. There's all kinds of technical issues involved, and I think some of them are alluded to in your article or outright mentioned. But like the big takeaway for folks, I guess, is that the market, the cannabis market, has effectively collapsed, and they needed some relief. And our Board of Supervisors was considering a bunch of different ways to try to thread the needle on sort of respecting and helping the community. Any observations about what comes next or how this was received?
Yeah, so I mean, I think a couple things. One is you're absolutely right that cannabis farmers locally have been kind of complaining about overtaxation and high regulatory and compliance fees for since the legal market was created, but have been kind of eking by. And this year, the wholesale market in California was just absolutely flooded with product, way more than Californians are consuming, which just created this massive price drop off. Prices dropped, I think, 300% over a handful of months, leaving, many farmers, they say, kind of on the brink of losing their farms and having to close down. And so the board, very much wanted to provide these farmers with some relief, feeling that both was the right thing to do for farmers, trying to go the legal route and trying to come into compliance, but then also that, if they, held firm with these tax bills in place, that likely, a lot of farmers would default to not pay them anyway. But it's interesting moving forward is that the Measure S taxes are actually a pretty small piece of the fees and taxes that farms have to pay locally, and the much more burdensome taxes come from the state. And so there was some talk at both these supervisors meetings of a hope that Humboldt County acting to implement tax relief will really kind of act as a beacon to the state to follow suit, and that the state was kind of holding off on taking any steps to address the situation until seeing what some local municipalities would do. In part, knowing that local governments kind of need this money a lot more than the state does. The state, has a pretty significant surplus at the moment, while Humboldt County is looking at a much different scenario. So I think moving forward, it'll be interesting to see what the state does. And then the flip side, when this comes back before the board for final approval in the form of resolution, the county administrative officer, Alicia Hayes, said she is going to present some recommendations on budget actions because with this tax relief, of course, comes a pretty significant loss of revenue for the county. I think the estimates are about $12 million that they had estimated would be coming in. Next year will not. And so that has pretty significant budget ramifications for a county that was already looking at, a projected 20 million deficit in a couple of years.
Well, again, thank you for this update on an ongoing issue of import to our community. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more down the road as this kind of plays out, both the impact on the budget and potentially some more state tax relief for our community. So thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And we're really squeezing it in here today because you've got an announcement about an article story that you've got in this week's edition that is about COVID. So what is the latest update on COVID here in Humboldt County?
Yeah, so yesterday at the Board of Supervisors meeting, Public Health Officer Ian Hoffman gave his kind of his semi-regular COVID update to the board. And within that said that he is planning to lift Humboldt County's mask mandate, which has been, I think folks will remember, has been in place actually since June. Back in August, the state dropped its mask mandate, and rather controversially, Dr. Hoffman kept Humboldt's in place, saying that we were in the midst of this Delta surge, and conditions just didn't really warrant allowing people to go maskless in indoor public spaces. And so the state, I think on Monday, announced that it was going to be letting its mask mandate expire on February 15th. And then yesterday, Dr. Hoffman said the county is going to follow suit and do the same. Even though I think it's worth noting, the county has not met the benchmarks that he initially laid out for conditions that would kind of warrant dropping the mandate, one of which was the county reaching an 80% vaccination rate, which we have not done yet. And then some other epidemiological benchmarks as far as case numbers and stuff like that we're still far short of.
One worth noting is test positivity rate.
Mm-hmm.
I think tracking that, there's this little tool out there online. You can check it out, and it'll tell you what the positivity rate is at any given time. And so it fluctuates drastically, but in the recent weeks, we've been over 10 times more positivity rate than that. I think you shared with us once the benchmark is supposed to be 2%. Is that right?
Uh-huh.
And we're above 20.
Yeah, we were. I mean, at the time that I wrote the story about this yesterday, the state had pointed to its declining test positivity rate as part of the reason it was going to let this mask mandate expire. And the state's was 8.8% as of yesterday, which is far higher than it has been, but also lower than it had been over the previous month or something like that. And Humboldt County's was upward of 30%. I think it was 33% or something like that. So there's a good indication that our rate of case spread here is significantly higher than the rest of the state currently.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you. In terms of how this is going to impact our community, or how we might anticipate it impacting us, with the county deciding that the mask mandate would be rescinded, what are the knock-on effects going to be for, I guess, businesses, schools, people? Any observations about that?
Well, a couple, yeah. I mean, one is that anytime we have seen any of these mitigation measures lifted, whether it's it's shutdowns or regulations on business or things like the mask order, there is an uptick in cases. It naturally follows, and that's kind of the balancing act of these things. So I think folks can expect that cases, which are very much on the decline of this Omicron surge, still much higher than they were at any point previously in the pandemic locally, but definitely lower than they were in the middle of January. Expect those to tick back up. And then, the other thing is it'll be interesting to see what businesses do when there is a countywide order in place. Businesses don't have much leeway, and they at least, put up signage and stuff saying that they're going to follow that order. And now this really puts the onus on businesses who maybe want to be a little bit more conservative and a little bit safer as far as preventing the spread of COVID, to put up their own signage and then try to enforce that, which we've seen over the course of the pandemic can lead to some disgruntled customers and some verbal abuse or altercations. So I think we'll be looking for that. And then the other thing I'd want to add is that this order lifting at this point does not look like it's going to apply to schools. And so there's kind of mounting pressure, not just in Humboldt, but all over the state and other parts of the country that do have school masking orders in place. And so I imagine that this will intensify those calls for a change with the orders that are currently in place for schools and healthcare facilities. But as of now, those aren't changing. So kids will still have to be masked in classrooms.
I think it's worth noting, too, that this the lifting of the mandate doesn't mean that, for example, Ian Hoffman thinks that that's the best thing to do. Like in terms of best practices and legal mandates are not the same thing. Mm-hmm. Thad, you included some of his, I believe at the end of the story, there was a quote from Hoffman about this.
Yes, definitely. He's saying that it very much remains a recommendation. It is just no longer a requirement. And to that point, Jen, the CDC and the California Department of Public Health both recommend masking in indoor public places, especially in areas of high transmission, which Humboldt County very much remains solidly designated an area of high transmission. So I think the across the board recommendation is very clear that people should mask up when out in public. It's just, no longer a quote unquote enforceable order.
Well, thank you for, I guess, what originally sounds like good news, but in reality, it's just a change. It's not, there's still going to be people practicing what they practice, where they practice it. There's still going to be conceivably pushback and tensions, etc. But I say this because people ask me, they're like, well, what do you think? Is this behind us? And no, we're still kind of knee deep in it. So thank you.
I look very forward to the day, David, that I can give you unequivocal good news on the pandemic front.
Yeah, on that note, let's get some good news. Let's ask Jen. Jen, what's going on this week in the arts and features beat?
This is the only time in my life whenever anybody turns to me and says, let's look to Jen for some good news.
Well,
she'll be like a little beacon of positivity. It's never happened before. It's very exciting.
It's on the calendar now.
An exciting thing, though, that's happening is the Morris Graves Museum of Art has a very cool exhibit right now by Bernadette Vielbeck. And she has a really fantastic installation exhibit called Analog, all caps. And for those of us who are analog on the inside, it's particularly refreshing, and I'm finding it speaks to me. Lindsay Lacewell Kessner, LL Kessner, as said in her byline, did a great story on looking at the work, and she's an artist herself, so she went and talked to Bernadette about her work and about what it means, and it's pretty amazing. When you come into the gallery, she describes this big yoke, and when I say yoke, I mean the big wooden thing that you put over oxen, right? And dangling from it are what look like two ticker tapes, and there's writing on them. And it's really interesting because this is installation work, sculptures, installations, and it's the kind of thing that, as much as I love an online gallery, you have to be in the room for an installation. And so there are all kinds of opportunities to go. Again, Arts Alive is great. This last one was canceled due to the surge in COVID cases. But truly, it's better to go just during museum hours.
Yeah.
It's better to get a better look. You have more time. You don't feel pressure to say something insightful about it. You can just enjoy it. But walking around the gallery space, you see these things that are, in a way, is this a piece of writing because you're reading it? Is it a drawing because it's sort of handwriting on paper meant to be visually interesting? Is it sculpture because it piles up on the bottom and becomes a shape? Installation work has, the capacity to draw in all of these things. And there's humor in this show. There's playfulness. There's nostalgia. There's a critique of our culture. What Vielbeck seems to be playing at with Analog is how things get obsolete. And for those of us of a certain age who have had to replace our music collections over and over again, I always thought someday I'm going to be rich and I'm going to have a vehicle that works with the current platform of music. Like, when people were carrying cassette tapes, we just had the radio. By the time we got the cassette deck, everybody's like, oh, we're doing CDs now. And then by the time I had the CD in the car, it was like, everybody's doing Bluetooth now. What are you doing with the CDs you're carrying around? So don't even speak to me about the vinyl collection. So she's looking at not only the way that things get outmoded, and that could be, for example, we think about music because it's the most annoying one, but think about how everyday items like an iron. She has one exhibit that shows one installation piece that shows a bunch of different forms of the iron. back when it was a piece of metal you heated on a stove, which the thought, honestly, those of you who ironed in that time, I am very impressed. I can't believe it was important enough. Like, without indoor plumbing, who cares if your shirt is wrinkly? I don't know, but people cared and people ironed. All the way up to the, fancy one that you probably have shoved in your closet, meaningless, unimportant, and yet technologically amazing when you think about it. Likewise, she has some very cool stuff about, when things are used and thrown away, what does it mean, right? If it had, for example, like a cassette tape, right? If it had that information on there, once we no longer go to that for information, what is it? It's a thing now. And what does the thing mean to us? Do you still feel like the pitter pat when you look at your mixtape from, it's not important what year?
Yeah.
But, she talks about things and how they get used, what they mean, old technology, things that look like a random item you might find in an antique or a junk store. And then once you turn it into a piece of art, so what is it now, right? It's a playful exhibit in that way. And one of the very cool things is, because I love some sculpture that tricks me. I like to be tricked. She has piles of bars of dirty soap, and they are in fact not soap, despite the brand stamps in them and the worn edges and the unmistakable shape. They are slip cast porcelain, and she has rubbed them with iron oxide to make them look filthy, like, working on a car and then washing your hands filthy. And she did this with the thought of family members. She took a really personal approach and thought about her different family members while she was rubbing these dirty. So instead of rubbing soap and getting clean, she was rubbing it dirty and thinking about the people, like, maybe a bar of ivory makes you think of, your Uncle Jim because of how he smells or something like that. Something about their personalities spoke to the shape, the brand, etc. And then she did this thing and made these piles. And then you think to yourself, well, soap is meant to vanish, right? But these are meant to stay. So what does that mean? Soap is supposed to make you clean, but these are purposely made dirty. She's really playing with a lot of pretty elemental ideas and pointing out things, particularly about the things that we use up and cast away. We aren't using yolks so much anymore. Look at a teenager's handwriting right now and ask yourself if cursive is still important in our culture. There are lots of things we just don't use anymore. And as a person who has a number of completely obsolete skills, it is a pleasure to see some of these things framed and to see them, kind of given a moment to shine, and to give us all kind of a chance to reflect on the things that we use up, throw away, and the things that we inexplicably cherish.
Well, thank you for sharing these insights on this conceptual art. I think installation art is something that some people aren't familiar with, or just not, it's not something that they do very often. But it's great to know that we have Bernadette Vilbig's exhibit here in our community, and we can go check it out. And, we don't have to drive to some big city 4 to 10 hours away.
Yeah. And, she mentions in the interview with L.L. Kestner that she comes from immigrant parents who became naturalized American citizens. So she's, first generation American, and the real kind of immigrant urge to never throw anything away. And I was like, oh my God, it's so real. And I think that, that really informed the experience for her, and of, looking at objects and seeing things become no longer useful. And if you've got that same feeling, that same like, oh, I can't bear to throw this away feeling, if you are stacking up Costco chicken containers, waiting for the day when someone tells you how they can be reused, this is the show to go and see.
Well, right on. That's about all of the time we have, but there's also a great article in there about binoculars, birding binoculars. Really cool.
Yes. Sarah Hobart has a great guide for you if you are freaking out about what binoculars to buy so that you can get birding. She's here for you. Breathe deep and read her piece. And
new restaurant opened up, coffee and wine shop called Harbor.
Yes, that's right. Over in Myrtletown, where suddenly there are lots of good things to eat. So definitely check that out. Erin Young, who is a wine person and a coffee person, and the perfect person to write this story on a new spot in Myrtletown.
Right on. Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you, Thad. We appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you so much, Dave.
North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now. Pick one up. Stay informed. Also available online 24/7. Everybody, like I said, stay safe, stay informed, and until next week, take care.